Hi there. Welcome to the Productive AI podcast, where we aim to simplify AI and make it more accessible to business leaders. I'm your host, Troy Angradon, and on today's episode, we're talking with Callan Schebella, CEO of Inference Solutions, about how conversational AI is impacting more traditional technologies like interactive voice response in call centers, why the natural language processing module at the heart of some of these products doesn't matter as much as the rest of the product, and how companies can take their next step in conversational AI regardless of their industry or sector. So I want to start by introducing Callan. Callan has over 20 years of telecom-related work. And Callan, I wanted to say, first off, thank you very much for making time for coming on the show today. And second, I want to ask you about this crazy career arc. You started in research and then eventually went into business development and then became a chief architect and then became a CEO. That is a very non-traditional career path. I was wondering if you could kind of give me some background on that, how that happened.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Troy, and thanks you for having me on the podcast today. So yes, I started my career as an engineer. Went to college and so forth, and then moved from there into a research role. So I was working at Telstra Research Laboratories, which back in those days, going back now 20 years, seems a long time ago, was one of the largest sort of telecom-focused R&D centres in Asia, and definitely the largest in Australia, where I come from. So we were looking at all sorts of interesting aspects that related to telecom network operators, Telstra being one of the largest telecom companies in the world and still is. And one of those areas was what we refer to as spoken dialogue design. So how do you build systems? In those days, it was strictly on the telephone. How do you build systems that could understand what people were saying, really move on, I guess, from the IVR technology that was commonplace back in the day. And so we were looking at things like speech recognition technology, text-to-speech technology, and natural language processing, which essentially is attaching meaning to what people are saying. We took some technology that we had developed there at Telstra Research, and we essentially spun it off as a separate company. And then I guess my role in research finished, and I moved into more the business development and product design side of things, and have essentially worked within Inference Solutions in various roles since then. And for the last 4 years have been the CEO at Inference Solutions. And the company is now a US company, and I'm based here in Austin, Texas.
Awesome. Yeah, I just thought that was fascinating when I saw that you sort of had the engineering background and then you went into business development sort of on the sales side and then over to the chief architect role, really back on the technical side, and now CEO, where of course you have oversight for everything in fundraising and all the rest of it. So pretty interesting arc. Let's talk briefly about the company, and then I want to kind of more broadly talk about just the industry and the market and what's happening in that space. Now, you guys build a global intelligent virtual agent platform. I think that's the language you use most often, that lets businesses leverage conversational AI, and we'll get into what conversational AI is. I saw the DMG consulting report, which you had posted, I think, recently, which said you guys in that market segment had the highest market share and the highest growth rate year over year, customer-wise. So first off, congratulations. And second would be why? How? How did you pull that off?
Oh. Yeah, so you're right. We describe what we do as operating an intelligent virtual agent platform. So what we mean by that is essentially think of what we sell as almost like a virtual employee. So if you were using, for example, a BPO, perhaps based in the US, perhaps based in the Philippines or India, you engage these types of organizations and they automate customer care workloads for you. Now, in a lot of cases, that customer care is in the form of conversations. So it's telephone calls arriving into a business. It is social media posts arriving into a business. It could be email. It could be web chat. It could be SMS driven, or including some of the sort of emerging platforms like WhatsApp and things like that. This all just relates to this kind of area of customer care. So if you were engaging a BPO to help you with that sort of workload, one of the things they're going to think about and the way they're going to price their product is how many people do they need to have in a contact center environment to be able to handle this customer care workload for you. So we sell pretty much exactly the same model. We work out how many virtual agents you need in order to handle your customer care workload. But the difference with us is there is no actual person sitting in a call center seat. It is all completely driven out of the network, and it uses some of these technologies that we've touched on already, such as speech recognition, text-to-speech, natural language processing, voice biometrics, sentiment analysis, and it just goes on and on and on. And so going back to your point around the DMG report, one of the reasons we have so many deployments and we're growing quickly is because we have largely a channel-driven model. So I mentioned at the start of the podcast that I came out of Telstra Research Laboratories. We have very much a network provider-centric approach to doing this. So the way we go to market is that we partner with large network providers, people like Telstra, people like AT&T, and dozens of similar companies around the globe. And then they take our platform, they often white label it, and they resell it to their customers. And so we have this sort of network effect where we have lots and lots of deployments happening because we're actually selling through predominantly channels.
And are they, when they take that, let's say you're working with AT&T as an example, so if you're working with them, and not specifically their story, but one of these service providers, are they turning around and essentially just reselling that platform down to their downstream customer, or are they building a solution and then selling that solution to the customer, or is it both?
It is both. So one of the, and I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit later on, but one of the aspects of the platform that makes it easy to resell is it has the concept of essentially reusable tasks. So if you imagine you had somebody that worked for your organization in a BPO in a contact center, you would give them a set of tasks that they need to perform. So if that phone rings, I want you to answer it. I want you to greet people this way. If an SMS message arrives into the queue, I want you to respond in this fashion. These are just examples of tasks. So in the Inference Studio model, which is what the platform is referred to as, you can, as a reseller, create your own content or your own tasks that you can then publish for your customers to use. So you think of it kind of like an app store, if you like, of content that people have created. So some service providers just take the public app store and use that. Some people create their own content. It really depends on how they want to take it to market and specifically who they are going after. So, for example, if you're a large carrier, such as an AT&T, but it doesn't have to be them, in North America, you may have a focus on government agencies, or you may have a focus on large education environments. If you are a smaller service provider, maybe you're more focused on small and medium business. So you can design tasks to go after those various verticals or even horizontals based on the size of the organization that you're looking at for a customer point of view.
Okay, perfect. So I want to back up just a little bit and talk about, you've been in this industry for 20 years and you've seen it from the research side, and then you productized, right? You guys came out and sort of spun off this external entity. Stepping way back, what has been the arc so far? And obviously there's a lot more to do, but just from sort of 20 years ago to now, what have been the big waves that have come through, and kind of where are we now and where are we going?
Right. So, obviously, if you go way back, beyond 20 years ago, you started customer care in terms of the automation of customer care was typically done through things like an IVR platform, a press one, press two type thing that everyone's obviously interacted with on the phone, and generally, universally disliked technology. A lot of what IVR did really back in the day was really just to really channel calls into various departments or into various contact centers within the contact center. So I want to pay a bill, or I want to check on whether my parcel's been delivered and so forth. It wasn't really doing a lot of automation per se. There was some sort of pay your bill on the phone type services where it was completely touch tone from start to finish, but for the most part you ended up talking to somebody, and it really was sort of seen as in the way between you and getting to an agent. We moved from there to, still going back more than 20 years ago, to directed dialogue speech recognition systems. So these were typical grammar-based systems that would recognize particular words or recognize particular phrases. You would move from there into what they call mixed initiative or more natural language style dialogues, where you were capturing information that was filling perhaps lots of slots. or pieces of information in a call. So something that could handle an utterance that could say, I'd like to buy a business class ticket from Los Angeles to New York on the day after tomorrow. There's lots of pieces of information in that sentence or that utterance that I need to capture and get correct, often referred to as a multi-slot or mixed initiative style dialogue. We then move from that into more statistical language model-based dialogues. So these are the classic services you get when you ring into typically large companies today, and they say things like, in a few words, please tell us the reason for your call today. And rather than using a traditional kind of handwritten grammar, which covers every possible permutation, they're using under the hood a statistical language model, which is looking at the likelihood of a word following another word, in n-gram models and things like that. And then we move from that, and I think this is probably the biggest shift in the last few years. We move to more public models where you can actually consume the underlying speech recognition, the underlying NLP, essentially as a service from a third party, whether that be somebody like Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Watson, and there are a few others as well. And for us, that has been the biggest shift in terms of being able to change the price point that you can build these systems for, and the speed at which you can build these systems. So right up until that point, you could characterize this industry as being dominated by technology companies that have a very heavy focus on professional services. Everything was typically custom built, and so you would build something over several months. Sometimes it would be tuned over several years, and as a result, the typical buyer of a piece of software like that was, a large bank or a large insurance company or a big government department. But the vast majority of the market, the mid-market and smaller, they were just not served by that technology at all because it was not cost-effective as you scaled down. As we move into more of these public API-driven language models and tuning sets and things like that, what we see is that now pretty much anybody, any organization can benefit from this sort of technology. And that has been the fundamental shift that we've seen in the last few years.
And so what is the current state of the art? What kinds of things can be done with today's technology, let's say leveraging some of these big public cloud providers, natural language processing engines and things like that, or even just the best of the state of the art of private engines that maybe your team has developed? What kinds of things can be done today? Because any place I call in, I still get the please tell us what you're calling about. I get that kind of a thing, and I always think I don't know what to tell you. I don't really know what the words are that you know or don't know. But what are some of the more advanced use cases that people might not know exist today in the best cases, in the best examples?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of them, as you said, people don't know that they exist. So some of I should step back. One of the interesting things about our platform is that the vast majority of what is developed on the platform is actually developed by the customer or by the service provider partner that is reselling it. So we are not particularly a heavy professional services organization. We really provide an online portal where people can build whatever they like. And the good thing about that is people do build whatever they like and build things that solve business problems that they have that, to be honest, I wouldn't have even thought of as something that someone would want to do. But just coming back to your point, what type of conversations can be automated? Pretty much any type of conversational transaction is a good candidate for automation today. So this could involve multiple steps of dialogue, questions back and forth and so on, but ultimately you're getting to the point where there is some sort of transactional element to what you're trying to do. So if it's an FAQ, you want to get the answer to some question. If it's tracking or tracing something, you want to be able to actually retrieve some information from a database. If it's a fault type service, you want to be able to log that ticket and have it appear in Salesforce or Zendesk or whatever it is. That's essentially the outcome of what someone is trying to achieve. What are the poor candidates would be when the conversation is really not in that structure. So for example, a crisis line type service where what is really involved is really a long conversation with a lot of human empathy back and forth on both sides, and a nuanced understanding of the human elements of what is trying to be achieved. That's where we would say no, that's not a good fit. So what are some of the interesting ideas that people are doing? There's a few of them. I can think of a lot of back of house virtual agents. So these are virtual agents that are not used by consumers or customers, but they are used by the staff or employees or stakeholders of a large organization, and they're completely hidden. They're behind the scenes. So these things include biometric-based systems for clocking on and clocking off, particularly if you have remote workforces that don't have access to a wall clock or something like that, and they're using a biometric engine to confirm that you are the person that should be in that building, and you are clocking on to work. And just as importantly, maybe you're cleaning that building and you need to clock off from that job. At 6 o'clock in the morning, we want to make sure that you successfully left the premises and things like that. There are other examples in sort of hospitality and the hoteling industry, where we have sort of fault systems where anybody walking around that works at a property can just pick up their phone and just press a button and say, yeah, there's a flashing fluorescent bulb out here in the car park. I'm standing under parking bay 47. I need someone to come and fix that for me, and have all of that type of an interaction completely automated. And create the ticket, whereas previously it would have to have been a person or someone had written it down on a notepad or something like that. Would be another example. The third one could be particularly relevant right now in the era of COVID, is services that allow remote employees to actually do their job. So, for example, oh my gosh, I've locked myself out of the company network. I need to reset my password. It's the middle of the night and I'm actually meant to be on my shift. What am I going to do? The help desk is closed. Well, there's actually a biometric powered password reset system where I can ring in, use my voice, and it's automatically integrated into my business, so it can reset my password and read it back to me over the phone as a temporary password and let me get back online. In fact, when we did some recent research back in March, virtual agent technology, the single biggest driver during COVID for adoption of virtual agent technology was actually empowering and enabling work from home staff. A lot of people don't appreciate just how big a problem that is. You might be, if you're a business of 10 people, perhaps you can just all work from home. But if you're a business of 20,000 people that has been relying on contact centers with thousands of people in them, and now all of those people have to work from home, it's a much, much bigger problem. And there's lots of things that emerge, that just your organization didn't face beforehand.
So yeah, that's really interesting to see that you're able to use these tools and technologies in those kinds of environments. And actually, I'm not at all surprised, because we see in some subsectors this kind of rush towards, let's fix these platforms, let's make it possible for our employees, our staff, our customers to be remote. So that's pretty cool. When you and I talked before, we kind of had this conversation around, as you've been in the market for a long time, you've seen it go through these different waves, these different iterations. One of the conversations we kind of touched on was like the big ahas or the key insights that you had along the way. Because at one point you were building these natural language processing engines, and we'd kind of had this conversation about some thoughts you had on that at the time. I wonder if you can kind of share some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. One of those aha moments was really looking at how these technology maturity curves were going on. So speech recognition was getting better, NLP was getting better, text-to-speech was getting more lifelike. And at the time, particularly after we recently spun out of Telstra, we were predominantly known as a user experience consultancy, and we had our own sort of software tools that would allow you to build speech recognition grammars that were much quicker to build than using human labor, because that's essentially how it was done. What we've seen over the last few years is that there's essentially a convergence to a commodity of some of these technologies. So back in the day, if your speech recognition engine was twice as good as the next person's, then that's something you could really talk about. You could say my word error rate is, the number of words in a sentence that I get wrong, is half that of my competition. We're now at the point where you're a fraction of a percent better than your competition, and it is no longer something, at least from our perspective, that you really compete on anymore. This technology has largely been commoditized, to the sense in the sense that nobody really cares about the difference between 98.5% accuracy and 98.6% accuracy. No commercial buyer, at least the ones that we talk to, really care about that. And so we absolutely shifted our focus away from the core engine technologies and focused more on what we refer to as the fulfillment problem. So one of the big challenges that still exists is, okay, these technologies are really, really powerful and they work, and there's no question about that. But how do I, as a business owner, get them to do something useful for my business? And how do I get that to happen in the shortest amount of time with the least amount of investment? And we refer to that as fulfillment. How do you make it do something? So, if someone's ordering flowers, how do I get those flowers actually ordered? Someone's tracking a parcel, how do I actually look up that parcel and get that information to the person that's calling about it? And so as these technologies have improved, the focus, at least from our perspectives, has moved into more the fulfillment issue. How do we get this technology in the hands of as many different organizations as possible? And that is what we focus on almost entirely now.
Yeah, and when we had that conversation, what I thought was very interesting about that was it sounded to me a lot like a couple of conversations I've been having with product managers in the space, AI product management, where they're saying that the core engine, in this case, natural language processing modules, things like that, natural language understanding, text to speech, speech to text. So those kinds of modules, as those things, as you say, commoditize, then where does the value come from? And the value comes from the product around the AI module, which is how does it integrate? How does it connect into your existing systems, your existing IT? How does it get outside of itself and into these other things? And so that the light bulb gets replaced and the ticket gets closed. So I think that's kind of a common refrain I'm hearing a lot, which is, yes, you can build an AI-enabled or an AI-first product, but don't forget about everything outside of the AI core, which makes the rest of that product stack.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add to that. I mean, our platform in particular is really one that attempts to provide choice to the consumer or to the buyer. So we don't actually care whether your preference is to use Amazon Lex as your NLP, to use Google as your NLP, whether you'd like to use Watson for your text-to-speech, or Google for your text-to-speech, or LumenVox for your text-to-speech. We actually don't mind. What we want to make sure, though, is that whatever you choose, it's just easy for you to access and easy for you to get a result in. And so a lot of the platform, and perhaps arguably some of the success behind the platform, is driven from the fact that it's not focused really on the technology anymore. It's more focused on trying to just solve a business problem and just giving you access to whatever underlying engines you need to do that. And if you're not happy with a particular engine, or you've heard about a new engine that has come out and you'd like to try it out, you can just log into Studio and in due course, you'll just be able to use that engine, because our job is really just to make sure that the best technologies are all available within one single, drag and drop kind of portal.
Okay, perfect. So I think that gives me a pretty good context for where you guys are at. Let me try and summarize what I've heard so far. So you've got a lot of these customers are really telecom providers, service providers, unified communication contact centers, things like that. You're doing a lot of your business through the channel. So you're using partners, and those partners are working with the downstream customers. And that, again, could be these telco SPs or contact centers. You're doing about 20% of your business. I think we had that conversation directly with end customers. How's that going? Is that changing how you do things in any way?
Yeah, I mean, it is to some extent, and it is also, it wasn't deliberate, is the other point to make here too. I think what we've seen over the last couple of years in particular is that intelligent virtual agents as a category is now really its own thing. So, 2 years ago, there wasn't many people that were out there putting out an RFP for an intelligent virtual agent solution. They might do an IVR refresh, or they might do a chatbot RFI or something like that to get vendors to respond. But in terms of the concept of this sort of singular thing that you would buy that can work over multiple channels, it's kind of a new market. And so obviously people like DMG that you mentioned earlier cover it very closely, and there are others as well. And I expect that it will further develop as its own market segment over the coming years. And so because of that change, you have businesses reaching out to us directly, and we, the way we work with the business is we say, look, we're happy to sell it to you directly. However, you can buy it from any one of these dozens of existing reseller arrangements that we have out there. If you'd rather buy it on your AT&T phone bill, if you'd rather buy it on your Telstra phone bill in Australia, you can do that. If you'd rather buy it from 5.9, if you'd rather buy it from 8x8, all of these are pre-integrated and ready to go, and you don't necessarily need to source from us. But if you want to, you absolutely can. And in some cases, as this becomes more and more, I guess, centrally themed in terms of people focusing on it, they say, no, we'd like a direct relationship with the platform operator, and so that's where the direct business has come from.
Right. Yeah, I've seen that model play out in a few other markets and offerings, so that's not at all surprising. I think, especially with larger customers, they say, no, that's fine. I'd rather just work directly with you guys, be able to provide product feedback directly to your platform team and things like that. In terms of you just touched on a second ago, I wanted to kind of go back to this, the kinds of conversations we've sort of talked about this throughout the discussion, but it seems like these are how many channels and how many types of conversations? We've got end customers, we've got internal staff, we've got and it can be across voice or text, right, through chat sessions. So what's the kind of span that this operates on?
Yeah, anything. The way our sort of mission here is to anything that is real-time conversational, we want to be able to support. So for us today, that means any type of voice traffic. So that could be typical phone calls, over SIP, for example, or could even be over WebRTC. Anything that is real-time or near real-time in its conversation, such as two-way web chat. So the little box that pops up on a website that says, hey, can I help you today? Anything that is message driven in the form of SMS messaging, so reminder services and things like that, where people are responding, I want to refill my prescription and all that kind of stuff. We've extended it also into we call them social media messaging platforms. So in particular, things like WhatsApp. People, and I'm not sure where your audience is predominantly located, but if you're operating outside of North America, WhatsApp is a really powerful channel. It's very common and used by, particularly as you get into areas such as Africa, it's used by a lot of businesses, and it's used by a lot of businesses for good reasons. It's pervasive, it's free to use, data networks are typically more expensive, and so rather than a business, let's say, building an iPhone app and putting it in the Apple Store, they will instead create a WhatsApp virtual agent and just have it sitting there on WhatsApp, and you'd use that rather than installing an app dedicated to your business, for example. So those channels, we also support a workflow channel, which is sort of like a robotic process automation or back office function. So you could say, hey, I want to get a virtual agent to run a set of reports for me, and then at 5 o'clock on a Friday, I want them to mail those reports out, or I'd like a virtual agent to go out and check my Facebook feed and look for particular things. And if you find one of those things, then alert me, ring me, call me, whatever, send me a text message or whatever it might be. So those are the main channels that we're focused on right now.
Okay, great. In terms of when you look at the market around, you look at the other providers in the market, and again, you guys showed up at the top of this list from DMG, and they sort of canvassed the market and said, hey, who are the players in the space? Just not naming names, but just thinking about how you differentiate from everybody else. I think when we talked about this before, one of the things we talked about was complexity of pricing models. You actually touched on it earlier in this conversation, as well as kind of scale up, scale down. And also, I think that the amount of work required for a customer, an end customer or a partner, to build a solution on top of this platform. Can you maybe talk through some of those things? Because we had some conversation offline about this, and I thought that was pretty impressive.
Yeah. So if you were to kind of think about the axes that we try to compete on, we want to be known as the solution that will get you a result in the shortest possible amount of time. Literally, if you asked for an account from your service provider, you could log into that account in Studio. You could build something by looking at some things other people had built and say, yeah, I want to use that as a starting point. And you could be talking to it, or chatting to it, or texting it, or whatever you wanted to do in 5 minutes. Like, it's that fast, really, really fast. And that's deliberate because at least the history of this industry has been the complete opposite, that these types of solutions have been very professional services and project management focused solutions that would have in the past cost you $500,000, $1 million, $1.5 million to roll out. And as a result, it was just the largest organizations that were buying them because no one else would get a return on investment at that scale, or I should say at that price point. By being able to bring that all the way down where you can actually get some sort of result in a matter of minutes, and then you can customize that and change that to whatever you like, it completely changes the way that people think about how to solve some of these problems. And so we typically would be entering into a new reseller arrangement or something like that, probably at the mid-market. The several hundred seats of contact center, maybe going down to just one seat or even no contact center. We would enter at that point. But what we have found over time is that a lot of customers that are buyers of these solutions are really, I'd say, fed up with that sort of super heavy professional services engagement. And they're also fed up with the idea that whatever gets built for them is like a black box. You can't really touch it. You don't know how it really works. If you want to modify it, you get somebody to come in and they'll change it for you. Whereas something like the Studio platform is completely transparent. You can change it yourself. You can modify it. You can switch technologies in and out. So it's very fast. It's very flexible. And it comes at a very attractive price point. One of the interesting things about the way that we price this platform is we price it just like perhaps a BPO would. So we'd say, how many virtual agents would you like to have? Each virtual agent is sold to you on a fixed price on a month-to-month contract. So you could buy one virtual agent, you could buy 1,000 virtual agents. You could just imagine that at one virtual agent, it might be taking the role of like a receptionist, in a let's say a dental surgery or something like that. At 1,000 virtual agents, it looks just like a really big call center in the Philippines or whatever. And we don't actually mind whether you want to buy one or you want to buy 1,000. And we don't mind that if you grow over time or you shrink over time. It really is a true kind of SaaS model, and it's a fixed price per virtual agent SaaS model.
That seems a lot easier than, so many of the cloud services these days are done on things like how many API calls are you going to do, or how many gigabytes of storage are you going to use. And I think, even me as a technical person who's been in the industry 25, 26 years, I read these things and I go, I don't know what that means. I don't know how much this thing is going to cost me. Is it going to cost me $1 or $1,000? So I think being able to price that way is smart.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, and again, it comes back to how do you get a business to achieve something with, using your platform? Well, the first way is for them to understand exactly how to think about it. And so if they can think about it as, I'm kind of leasing, if you like, a virtual employee, and if I like it, I'll lease more of them, and if I don't like it, I'll lease less. And I have a good sense in my own business as it runs today, how many people I have doing that job. So it becomes much easier for them to understand. So, for example, we often work with a customer and we'll say, well, what I really need to do is I need to automate payments in my business. Okay, great. How do you do payments today? Well, I've got these people over here, and they take credit cards over the phone, and I've got to get my annual PCI compliance for this group, and I know how much that costs. And I said, well, how many people have you got? Well, I've got 50 people doing that. So how many virtual agents would I need from Inference? 50. Exactly the same. Just think of it as almost a one-to-one type thing. And the reason for that is a virtual agent is sold very much like an employee. So if it's occupied, if they're working on something, then they're not available to work on something else. You and I are having a conversation. While I'm having this conversation, I'm not over here having a different conversation with somebody else. So it's very easy to understand what a virtual agent is, how many you might need. And if you get it wrong, well, then you just change the order for the following month.
Right. Yeah, I think simplicity in pricing will go so far as a part of the greater puzzle of it, making this explainable, making it understandable, making it accessible to people. Because I think at a starting point, the technology, it comes across as being too complex. And then the second thing is, if I want to buy it, how hard is that? And it becomes complex to do that. So I think that's really critical industry-wide. And I think that a lot of companies could learn from how you guys are approaching the pricing model here. I would imagine that's that the customers who are talking to you say, oh, well, I've had 5 conversations with 5 other conversational AI companies. This is way more easy for me to understand how I can buy it. So in terms of the customer size and fit, now you've said, they could start as small as 1, but I'm assuming there is some kind of range of customer type and size and or sector. How would you say, what is your sweet spot? Where should folks think that maybe they should be talking to you?
across the many, many hundreds of deployments that are out there, the average number of virtual agents per deployment, I think it's a 10. However, the mean and the median in that cohort of customers is very far apart. And it really comes down to mostly the partner that is taking the solution to market. So as I mentioned before, 80% of revenue is through partners. Some of the, if you pick a tier one carrier, like an AT&T or a Telstra or any one of those, the average size of a deal that they're doing is probably measured in the hundreds of virtual agents. Whereas you pick a small and medium business focused service provider, it could be easily down into 2, 3, 4 agents. So there's many deployments down at the small end. There's obviously many deployments up at the big end. I think the key thing here is it really doesn't matter to us. What we have been able to show over the last few years is that you can get a return on investment at any scale, and in particular, even at small scale, which was always the challenge for this industry because it was just too hard to get started. So I would say there is no real sweet spot. We have customers that process many, many, many millions of interactions per month with us, and we have others that process only a few thousand, but those are valuable interactions for them, and they get a great ROI based on the product at that small scale.
Okay, so if maybe the other way to slice that then would be if they do have transactional, and I'm going to go back to Dr. Kai-Fu Lee, who I like to reference a lot, his kind of model on these things, which is, AI is really great at single domain, single task, transactional things that don't need a lot of empathy versus human space, which is really multitask, multi-domain, empathetic, lots of communication. So if they're doing any kind of transactional things today through a business process outsourcing shop or whatever, call centers, those kinds of things, they may be good candidates for looking at this kind of a technology to see if it can augment what they're doing. Is that fair?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. In some research that we did recently, we asked people we asked 500 business IT decision makers how they would rate their self-service and automation strategy, and most people rated themselves above average, right? So, which is pretty normal human behavior. And then we asked them, well, these are the top 10 sort of transactional automations that we see in our customer base. How many of these have you done in your business? And the answer was almost none. It was like 10% of those. So what people often miss is just how broadly things can be automated today. And sometimes they just need some ideas.
Where is this going to go in the next 2 to 3 years? I don't like to look too far out in these things because I think we all have kind of a bead on like where the technology and the pricing will be. And one of the conversations you and I had prior to this was kind of around the orders of magnitude of cost reduction, and you've touched on it here. It used to be millions of dollars plus professional services. Now they can sort of start by buying a single virtual agent and paying on a per month basis. So the costs structure underneath that has dropped. The cost of the product has dropped, and of course the technology's gotten better. Do you have any sort of insight into how complex of a task can these things do in the next 2 to 3 years? Like just looking forward at the technology.
Well, I think the first thing to do is perhaps not a technology thing, but a market thing, and that is we're still absolutely very early on in our adoption here. We're talking, a small number of percentage points where true automation is actually in place. If you look at, for example, the total annual spend on contact center software, somewhere in around a $20 billion market. If you look at the labor spend for the people that use that software, the contact center agents, it's like $200 billion. So it's a 10 times bigger market than the biggest market in this space, which is interesting in itself. It's going to be really difficult to say how good we're going to be able to get. And to be honest, I think we're, to a large extent, for most companies, we are already there. What we don't have out there right now is just the awareness that businesses of any size can use this sort of technology today and that they can get a return on investment from it in a short period of time. And so really what I expect is you'll just see a really rapid expansion in the number of organizations that actually have a true conversational AI focus. And I think what you'll also see is when industries are sort of like this in their early years and they start, people start getting excited about them, there's a lot of what we'd call architecture out there. At least that's what we call it, which is sort of like, like a slide pack about how to benefit from artificial intelligence or something like that, but there's really not much behind it. When I was talking to an analyst group the other day, they said they were tracking 2,000 different chatbot companies. Now, that's not really that sustainable. If you ask that same analyst group, well, how many of those do not only do web chat but actually could do voice technology as well, it goes from about 2,000 to about 10 or 20 or something like that. So it's you really need to do your homework as a buyer in this space to kind of work out what it is that you're actually looking at, because I would think that for somebody new to the area, there's just a lot of noise that you've got to get through. So firstly, over the next few years, you'll see a reduction, I hope, in the amount of noise that's out there. You'll see these underlying NLP engines just get more and more sophisticated in the way that they can switch contexts within the conversation, very much like a person can. Now, to be fair, that's a small subset of the actual interactions that you get in a contact center environment typically. Typically, people are just trying to get an outcome. They don't go in there with 7 things that they want to talk about. They go in there with one main thing. That's what we've seen from our data. But you'll see even releases from Google this week talking about their next generation of their Dialogflow NLP, being able to support these sorts of context things to make it even more human-like in the way that it can respond. I suspect that's going to improve, but it's already at such a level now that I think we're going to get to the same position that we got with, say, speech recognition, where it's a diminishing return and people are going to not really be enamored by it. It's going to be the difference between 95% and 96%. Nobody actually cares, at least from our experience. So I think what you'll just see is you'll see a more pervasiveness of this technology. One of the interesting areas that I think will perhaps emerge over the next few years, perhaps not 2 years, but a little bit beyond, is getting down into the realm of personal virtual agents. So not just, for example, Inference Solutions having a virtual agent if you call them or chat to them or whatever, but Callan Schebella having a virtual agent, almost like a personal assistant that is always on in the cloud, handles all my calls, handles all my text messages, understands my work setup, in terms of my calendar and all of these sorts of things. This is where I think the space will be, shifting to in the next few years, because that market is probably an order of magnitude or more bigger than even the entire contact center market. And if you look at large network operators, they're always on the lookout for the next big thing. What is it that they can sell? It used to be that 40 years, 30 years ago, it was voicemail. I can sell every subscriber I have, I can sell them voicemail. And then it was like, oh, mobile phones came out. I can sell them mobile phones. Then they realized, I can sell them SMS messages, and everyone's using SMS messages. And then the next one is, what am I going to sell now? Am I going to sell IoT, 5G? Sure, that will work. But one of the other things I could do is I could just sell one thing to every single subscriber that I have. And I think personal virtual agents could be that.
Yeah, it reminds me, when you were talking about that, it reminded me of the old, I don't know if you remember this, the old video that was kind of a concept video that was done by Apple called the Knowledge Navigator. Do you remember that?
I don't remember that, but I mean, I remember some other actual companies that were around back in the day that actually had a go at this type of thing, really before the technology was really ready, and still, produce some pretty impressive things. But now the advantage is that the technology is ready.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, that brings us kind of to the end of the conversation. I just wanted to collect a couple of thoughts from you on, what would you recommend to somebody who is looking at the space, and this isn't sort of, go to our website so much as how should people get educated on where things are at, what might be possible, what they might want to consider doing in their business, things like that. Do you have any suggestions or guidance or thoughts on that?
Yeah, it is a difficult one to navigate right now because there is just so much stuff out in the market right now. Obviously, if you're a larger organization and you have a subscription to analyst publications, then absolutely look there. There's good stuff being done by obviously DMG, Frost and Sullivan, and all of the big analyst groups putting out IVA reports. One of the things to be aware of is that the phrase has not been unified yet. So intelligent virtual agents, digital assistants, conversational AI, these are really kind of synonyms for the same type of technology. So that makes it a little bit more difficult. there are some blogs out there that you can go and look at, but I think really I would stick at this stage to cut through that architecture. I would stick at this stage to some of the leading analyst reports. Just have a look at those. They'll at least give you a sense of the vendors, and then what you really want to prove to yourself is how easy is it that am I going to get started with a technology like this? We try to take that to as extreme a sense of ease as you can get. So you should be able to go to our website, you should be able to download an account, you should be able create an account, log in, build something, talk to it, and then show the stakeholders in your organization, hey, this is what this kind of technology can do for us. And you could do that without ever talking to us if you wanted to. And we really think that you want to ask the same kind of question to each of these vendors that you might be looking at. How can I do this sort of thing with you?
Perfect. What is the best way for people to reach out to you directly and also the company?
So the easiest way to firstly reach the company is via our website, which is inferencesolutions.com. We're rather a transparent organization, so we have a full documentation portal there, so you can actually go and look at all of the interfaces. You can look at all the things you can build. You can look at what other people have built without ever having to pay any money. The idea is that you can just really evaluate this kind of technology for yourself, and I'll provide my email address, perhaps that you could post with the podcast. It's just callan.schebella@inferencesolutions.com, and obviously I like presenting at things like this, so you'll probably see me out and about.
Excellent. That sounds great. Yeah, in fact, I think I ran into your team at a recent AI conference that you guys were involved in sponsoring. So excellent. Well, Callan, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I know you've got a lot going on, especially with all the growth you guys have happening. So thank you so much for making the time, and to your team for making this possible today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us, and have a good day. Thanks, Troy.
So that'll bring us to the end of today's Productive AI podcast, and that was with Callan Schebella, the CEO of Inference Solutions. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please check out the show notes for links to everything we discussed today, as well as the contact points, and thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.